Today's episode was recorded live at the Poster House Museum in New York City on September 6th, 2025, in conjunction with their exhibit Fallout: Atoms for War and Peace. Before the talk began, we watched a simulation video of nuclear war in the 21st century. If you'd like to watch the video, you can find the link in this episode's description on our website, singforscience.org. And at the end of the episode, Laurie Anderson leads the audience in Tai Chi. The video of that segment can also be found on our website. Please be sure to check out our other episodes, including a conversation with David Byrne on the topic of eel ecology. Don't forget to click subscribe, and please rate the show on your favorite podcast platform.
Since the 1950s, all human beings are slightly radioactive because we all carry in our bodies the radioactive carbon that was produced in these nuclear explosions from testing all of these nuclear weapons. It's in our bones, it's in our blood, it's in our body cells. And it will take thousands of years for this carbon, radioactive carbon from these nuclear explosions to decay away. But yeah, we made ourselves and our entire planet radioactive through this process.
Here come the plane. So you better get ready, ready to go. You can come as you are, but pay as you go. Pay as you go.
Welcome to Sing for Science, the show where musicians and scientists talk about music and science. I'm your host, Matt White. Each week we'll talk about a song by our guest artist and how it connects with our guest scientist's area of expertise. Tonight we'll be speaking with visionary New York musician and performance artist Laurie Anderson. Laurie's 1982 debut album, Big Science, is a commentary on rapid scientific progress and the threats to humanity introduced by the atomic age. The album's breakthrough single, Oh Superman, includes the ominous warning, "Here come the planes, so you better get ready to go." In a recent interview on 60 Minutes, Laurie explained that the song is about how technology cannot save you. Also joining us is physicist and nuclear policy expert, Dr. Zia Mian. Dr. Mian heads Princeton's program on science and global security, where he leads research on nuclear arms control, non-proliferation, and disarmament. In addition, Zia co-chairs the Scientific Advisory Group for the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and is co-founder of the Physicist Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction. Dr. Mian is part of a long line of Princeton physicists from Einstein onward who draw on their expertise to try and awaken the public to the truly devastating scope of nuclear threat to civilization as we know it. The title of tonight's episode on the podcast is Oh Superman, Can Science Rescue Us from the Perils of Its Own Progress? Poster House, please help me welcome to the stage Laurie Anderson and Dr. Zia Mian. So I think the first thing I want to ask you, Laurie, it's my understanding of the phrase big science is that it was coined by scientists to describe the massive scaling up of research post-World War II in America. In other words, science up until that point had been kind of limited to smaller research endeavors, and then once the bomb was developed, that the government was behind these far more vast enterprises. Does that jibe with your understanding when you decided to entitle this album that?
Good question, because I don't know who actually, where that phrase came from, those two words. I know it was kicking around, and I thought it was it rang a bell for me, and so I think I might have thought that I made it up myself, probably, but I know that, you just walk through the world and so many things are swirling around, and some of them end up in songs and some of them don't.
I'd be curious to know what else was going on in your orbit at that time. I mean, as we can see from this show, late 70s, early 80s was part of this concerted effort known as the nuclear freeze movement. Was that on your radar, or were you a part of that?
Yes, but much more. That particular record was much more about, I would say, other types of technology than what we're talking about tonight. And by the way, I could barely watch that video. I don't know how you are feeling. I watched it this morning, and I really couldn't speak for a very long time.
I think I'd heard you say on 60 Minutes that, Superman is talking about how this idea that technology cannot save you. But I will point out that this album has continued over, in the intervening 45 years, has continued to be quite prescient. And I think I read that after 9/11, is it true that you performed that's Superman, and then people were really impacted by that one particular lyric, "Here come the planes, they're American planes"?
It's not that it's so prescient, it's that things have not changed that much. More to the point, I think, that it's, yeah.
An album like this that is imbued with so much, I guess, cultural commentary or almost a critique, was there like a particular message that you were trying to convey?
I just don't think of music as containers for messages, because they're not very good ones, I think, for certain kinds of things. So I think it is more unless part of the message is the way you say it, which of course it is, but just to say that this song means that never really makes it for me. Yeah. But while I was looking at the piece that you made, I was not so much thinking of the 80s as much further back, as my first experience with this terror was the Cuban Missile Crisis when I was 15, and realizing we are going to die, that was very clear to me at that point, that it was very, very likely that was it. So this has always been in the back of my mind, and in various versions of that kind of terror. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't just particularly about this, as many people who write songs know, that's an accumulation of what you think, and not a commentary on the moment.
Could I ask you, Zia, to tell us a little bit about the nuclear freeze movement? Because this was around, it was actually 1982, the year that Big Science came out, that really took shape.
As I'm sure everybody knows, and as Laurie just mentioned, every so often crises bring nuclear weapons out of the background of our lives into clear view. And the Cuban Missile Crisis certainly was one. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 was the first time that almost everybody in the world first came to know about the existence of nuclear weapons. And by the time we get to the early 1980s, Ronald Reagan has been elected president of the United States. And he said he wanted to make 10,000 new additional nuclear weapons for the United States, and that we should confront the Soviet Union. And he actually had a vision of what he called fighting the evil empire. And people in the Reagan administration talked about fighting and winning a nuclear war. And new nuclear weapons were going from the United States to be placed in Europe. There were 7,000 American nuclear weapons in West Germany at that time. Think about it for a minute. 7,000 just in West Germany. And it's no surprise then that when Randy Forsberg, who's a young military policy analyst, came up with the idea of a nuclear freeze, that the first thing we should do is at least stop making more nuclear weapons. That if they're talking about making 10,000 more, then the other side will make 10,000 more, and then we'll say we need to have more than they, so we will make another 10,000. And this is what the first 40 years of the nuclear age was like. We went from one country with nuclear weapons, the United States, in 1945. The Soviet Union gets them in 1949, and then the arms race begins. So each wants to have at least the same number, if not more. And it just kept building and building until by the early 1980s, both sides had about 30,000 nuclear weapons. So when Randy Forsberg says, look, we have to start with at least freezing where we are if we're going to be able to stop this from getting much worse, this idea caught the public imagination, not just here, but around the world. And it led to this enormous protest in Central Park, where 1 million people gathered in Central Park to say, look, this has to stop. And it wasn't an idea that came from a powerful person. It didn't come from the White House. It didn't come from Congress. It didn't come from a powerful institution. It didn't come from professors or generals. It came from this perfectly normal young woman analyst in Massachusetts saying, look, here is an idea about how we can begin to get everybody to understand how to stop this getting worse. And so the idea caught the imagination, it caught the moment. And the most important part of all this, of course, is that when Americans responded that we've had enough of this, this has to stop, Reagan paid attention, Congress paid attention. Because when the people move, eventually politicians have to deal with that fact. On the Soviet side, when they saw that there is such massive protest in the United States, Gorbachev was able to convince the other Soviet leadership that we should try and take an initiative to end the nuclear arms race. So he actually proposed getting rid of all nuclear weapons. Not just freeze, he said, let's just get rid of all of them. And then Reagan agreed. So by 1985, we'd gone from this idea of a freeze to the President of the United States and the head of the Soviet Union agreeing to get rid of all nuclear weapons. So that's how history works. The tragedy of our time 40 years later is that they couldn't figure out actually how to overcome the internal resistance from their own nuclear military industrial complex and the nationalists in their country who said, no, we should still have it because the bomb gives us power. We need to win, we need to be strong. And so we lost that moment.
Can you tell us, explain in your words why this idea, atoms for peace, why deterrence is a misguided strategy, why that is not a way that we can rely on. This is what we've been relying on, at least the military-industrial complex for so many years. But if you could explain in your words why deterrence is not a reliable strategy. We've got all night.
There's a simple way to perhaps think about this. If you try to scare somebody into doing something, you also make them afraid of you. If they're afraid for themselves and afraid of you, they will not act reasonably. They will act out of fear. Fearful people don't act reasonably. So what we've actually seen is that when you go around threatening people, people decide that they're going to get even. And so what we've seen in the pursuit of deterrence, that you will do what I say, otherwise I will hurt you really, really badly. The late Daniel Ellsberg, who many of you know from the Pentagon Papers, was a leading nuclear deterrence theorist. And he said, look, when we do it, when we threaten some country with our nuclear weapons, don't do this or else, what in America we call putting all options on the table. He says, when they hear that, they see themselves being blackmailed by a nuclear threat. Because what we say is deterrence, They read it as nuclear armed extortion. What Putin has done in the Ukraine war. Let me do what I want, otherwise I will use a nuclear weapon. So call it deterrence, call it blackmail. It's the same thing. It's a question of, are you at the receiving end of the threat or not? Mm-hmm. Both of them are fundamentally coercion through the threat of absolutely incredible, indiscriminate violence. And so that's the question. What kind of people are we that this is how we think we should defend ourselves? By the threat of undiscriminate, genocidal mass murder.
Can you talk a little bit about why it is you think we become so desensitized to this? You know, I read this recent New Yorker article, and it was talking about the Fisher Protocol. Can you tell the audience about that? Because we become so detached from what this means. You know, there's this mass proliferation, and these numbers almost can become meaningless. You know, we become so insensitive to scale, tens and millions of people killed by these weapons. And then so this guy came up with the protocol. Can you tell the audience about that?
So when Matt talks about we have become desensitized, the first thing to ask is, who is the we? Right? People often forget that when we talk about nuclear weapons as a deterrent, as a defense, there are 193 countries in the world. They all have countries that they have problems with, adversaries, enemies. Out of 193 countries, only 9 have decided they need nuclear weapons. So it's not normal to want or to have nuclear weapons. It's not that they couldn't build them. They've chosen not to go down that road. So the first question to have is to actually ask, what makes those 9 countries pathological? Right? That's what needs to begin the conversation. They are states of exception. It's not normal for countries to do this. And they've had, ever since 1945, to make nuclear weapons if they've wanted to. But they've chosen not to. The ones that really want to, even if they're relatively poor and struggling even to feed their people, have managed to do it. But out of 193, only 9 have gone down this road. So thinking about nuclear weapons, let's not assume that it's normal to have them, to want them, to threaten to use them. It is not. The second part of it, though, is that when we ask about how has it become normalized, 3 things, and then I'll stop. The first is that ever since the beginning, it was seen as a really difficult scientific expert thing to think about nuclear weapons, right? It was, people thought nuclear weapons, they thought Einstein, they thought Oppenheimer, they thought it's really hard to get your head around nuclear weapons. It's too complicated for me. We still talk about, it's rocket science, as if somehow it's not something ordinary people can understand. And this may be good for scientists, and it's certainly what allowed big science to work, because the first big scientific project was the Manhattan Project, right? Where thousands and thousands of scientists were put to work in secret facilities around the country to make the nuclear weapon. And President Truman actually described building the nuclear weapon as the battle of the laboratories. Our laboratories against their laboratories, our scientists against their scientists. And he says, we won. So one is this special status, and people think that, this is science, it's hard, I won't understand it. The second is the secrecy. Right? People think that it's all about secrets. They keep nuclear secrets. We don't know so many things about nuclear weapons, and so it's hard to have a serious democratic conversation when everything's a secret. Throughout the Cold War, the budget for nuclear weapons, how much we were spending every year, was actually a secret. I mean, how is Congress supposed to explain to its constituents, this is how much we're spending on nuclear weapons, when they couldn't actually tell you what the number was? So it's all about secrets. So expertise and secrets are part of the reason that people just think, I don't know, and it's too hard. And the third is that we have what you could call not a democracy, but a guardianship. The government tells people, they're there, don't mind, we will look after you. Right? Trust us. We have your best interest at heart. We will defend the country. Don't worry about it. And people think, well, it's hard, it's secret, it's complicated. I'm sure they can look after it, so it's fine. Until a crisis happens. And then everybody thinks, oh my God, what's happening here? So that's part of what's happening. It's not normalized. It's just most of the time people can't do anything about it because they've been socialized by these processes until it comes right into your face. And then you have to confront it. And that's when things start to move.
I'd like to ask you, with all these fluctuations of activity, what tends to make things go down? I mean, in terms of, one of the things I heard today, we talked about it, the peak of this is, let's say, 60 to 80. More than half of the scientists who are in the world were engaged in, in the US, were working on weapons of mass destruction. That is a huge number of brains working on that. And then it dropped off. So what made it drop off? What are the forces that aside from citizens doing things, which I think I would like to get back to later, because I think that the model of that, of citizens influencing the politicians, is very different for us now. And so, but that's for later. So first, if you could talk about these fluctuations and why suddenly there's less energy going to mass destruction.
So, thank you, Laurie. That's a great question. And this is where I think peace movements matter in ways that people don't normally think about. So in my own case, right, at the time that you were doing Oh, Superman, I was in college doing physics. And there are these people protesting and giving out flyers, including some of the posters that are in the exhibition here from the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament and others saying, yeah, nuclear weapons are bad, we should get rid of them, we don't want to have a nuclear arms race. And so you see people raising these questions. And people would say, well, you're doing physics, so what are these things? How do they work? What does it mean, nuclear war? And they don't teach that in physics. They teach quantum mechanics, they teach nuclear physics, they teach all kinds of other things, but not nuclear war fighting. And so I went and got some books and read about it. And then decided that now I know, what do I do with this knowledge? And so one of the things that activists do, that musicians do, that writers do, that all kinds of people do, is they put questions into the public space for everybody to come into conversation with. You can choose to ignore it and say, look, I don't want to know. I just want to go do my physics. Or you can say, well, look, people think this is important. People are protesting. People are making a fuss. What's going on? Why does this matter? And actually try and figure it out for yourself and decide. And one of the things that happened in the early 1980s, because of the peace movement and the big protests, was that thousands and thousands of young scientists had to decide, so what do I think about this? And one of the things that President Reagan wanted to do was to build the Star Wars missile defense. He was going to put all these things in space to shoot down the Soviet missiles, and that way we would win the war. And as some of you may know, Donald Trump has revived this. It's called Golden Dome. Right? He's going to put interceptors all over the place to shoot down incoming missiles. And thousands and thousands of scientists across the United States signed a petition saying, we will not work on this, and we will not take any research money from the government to do any research on this, because this is just not right. And so that's part of what happened, that we create the conditions where people have to ask, well, what's right for me? Now that I know, what am I going to do with this knowledge? And that, I think, is the key thing, that for many scientists, like ordinary people, it's easier to just go through your daily work. You get up, you go to work, you do your thing, whether it's writing music or doing physics, until one day something happens. You have an encounter, you see something on the television, you read something in the newspaper, you see a protest. And then you have to think about, now what do I do with this new thing that I know? And that actually had an enormous impact. A whole generation of scientists, in the same way that the Vietnam War had an enormous impact on a whole generation of scientists. They thought, I don't want my science going to help the American war machine kill people in Vietnam. And they said, I won't do this, I won't take their funding, I won't go and work for the military corporations. So activists, peace activists, can actually have an enormous impact on what scientists, as human beings, choose to do with their skills. And so the biggest impact that brought that process down was this confrontation, the contest against the Cold War.
I'd like to ask you to speak a little bit to the scientific divide a bit more. And I think when I was considering your work and this song, the thing that jumped out at me was "Here Come the Planes, They're American Planes." And I thought to myself, you know, here you are, a physicist so passionate about this work. That, my interpretation of that lyric is, you know, we've invited this. This is a problem of our own making. And I'd be curious to know if, as a physicist, you feel more invested in this, you feel like you bear more responsibility because this technology was developed by physicists. Is that part of the narrative?
It's hard for any individual to kind of feel responsible for something that thousands and thousands of people over decades and decades have been doing, right? It's not all on me, right? But I direct your attention to the quote on the wall there in the white letters. It says, and it's from Albert Einstein. He says, I made one great mistake in my life when I signed a letter to President Roosevelt recommending that atomic bombs be explored. Right? So Einstein wrote this letter to Roosevelt in 1939, telling him it might be possible to make a nuclear weapon. And he regretted it afterwards. And in 1945, Einstein actually launched the Emergency Committee of the Atomic Scientists, which was the first scientific effort to educate the public about the dangers of nuclear weapons. So he wrote a letter to scientists around the world asking for $1 million, fundraising letter, to have money to begin a campaign to educate people about what nuclear weapons meant. So they funded documentary films, they worked with women's groups, trade union groups, church groups, all kinds of people to do basic activism, but as scientists to say, look, this is what the bomb is, this is what it means, and this is why we need to get rid of it. And so scientists have been on both sides of this, explaining to politicians that, yeah, these things are possible, and some of them went off and built it. But let me stop with one other story, and that is that when they were building the atomic bomb in the United States, at Los Alamos, many of you will have seen the film Oppenheimer, the person who was the head of the theory to work out how would you build it was a guy called Hans Bethe, who's a brilliant German physicist, won a Nobel Prize for physics. And so this was Bethe in 1945, helping design the first atomic bomb. 50 years later, Bethe made a public appeal to scientists around the world that all scientists should refuse to work on nuclear weapons and other weapons of mass destruction. He says, look, we should all just stop doing this. And it comes back to the question that Laurie had about, how did scientists start moving away from weapons? It took him a long time to get to that, but 50 years later, he said, not just me, but all scientists everywhere should refuse to work on weapons of mass destruction. We should not let our science and our skill be used to kill people with these kinds of weapons. And so it's not one side or the other. There's a conflict within science, between science and government, science and nationalism, and science and a sense of humanity. And that's the struggle that plays out.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about, you're mentioning educating the public, and in the situation that we find ourselves now, I find that an odd concept, or when the way we learn things is now so much, I would have to say propaganda. You know, it's Fox News tells you what it is. So educating the public is about media, and it's also about how many people think that's true. I'm just thinking of a list I saw recently, which was like 25 states with the letter C in their names. I was like, there's only 10 in this list that have C in them. And I was like, according to who? We have no according to now. We now have no according to the Supreme Court, according to the law. We have no according to, we don't have this. It's working very, very differently now. And I think I'd like to try to address that, what it's like to live in America right now, and not 20 years ago or in the 80s, but now the way information is presented and received, it's just basically you fly something and go, how many people think that? And then it's, you know, in a way, it's very democratic. You know, it's very nice. But according to who and how, as activists, what does that mean now in terms of presenting information? To who and how? I've been very involved in this in the last few months just because I particularly was asked to do a long talk about the rise of fascism in Europe, and as part of a big theater festival in Vienna that was music and theater and literature and dance, and it was 3 weeks long about this topic. And so I was supposed to deliver a 2-hour talk about the relationship of government to love in the radio station ORF, where Hitler announced his annexation of Austria. So I said, could you make that like a little less loaded as a place to give this talk? And so I had to think of what government and love have to do with it. It was quite a brain bender, you know. So I try to bring everybody in writers that I admire, Marcus Aurelius, Cornel West, who said, justice is what love looks like in public. Many people who've trying to talk about when you make a group of people that have a common cause, whatever it is, what does that have to do with force and love? So it was, anyway, I think that I would like to focus now on our situation right now, with the headlines today of where it's the Department of War suddenly, and it's not defense. And I want to look at that and how that reads, and what do we do now? What do we do now about this? I mean, it's great to be theoretical about how all of this has been building to this, but we are in a very, very unique situation right now. I consider it an absolute emergency. I really do. I don't think this is something to just, it's another fluctuation. I'm sure you don't either. You know, I don't mean to say what people think, but I think it is an emergency. And I would like to focus on how we, as Americans now, can look at this and what we can do. What can we do? I wish I could be a student in your course. It sounds so amazing what you're. Can you just describe briefly what it is that you teach at Princeton? This is like.
So our semester just started this week, and so this semester I'm teaching a class called Life in a Nuclear-Armed World, and they're first-year students. Right? So they arrived at Princeton last week. They're sitting in class, and okay, we're going to talk about what it means to live in a world where you are, 30 minutes away from what we just saw, and where Putin threatens to use nuclear weapons over Ukraine, and we see the other horrors that are unfolding in the world. And the question becomes, how do you think about that? What does it mean to live like that? And in a funny sort of way, the question of the nuclear age for a long time is not how do we live, but will we live? And that's, will we live? So we have to grapple with what we want from our lives and what we're going to do with them in that context. And so that's the sense of emergency, right? So that emergency that Laurie mentions, I agree completely. But this also is an emergency that is, in its own way, kind of coded into the world that we've made. And I think it begins first with, what can we do? The first is to begin with the practice of humility, right? Let's not assume that we know how to solve this. Let's not assume that there's somebody out there with an answer, that if we could just find the right leader, we could just vote in the right president, this will all go away. I think this is one of those kinds of situations where, for the reasons that Laurie was mentioning about, how do we know what is actually true anymore? How do we know who's on the other end of our communications and where those communications are actually coming from? Is that we actually need to go back to fundamental basics of what does it mean to actually construct a community, right? That, as many people know, that over the last several decades, there has been this hollowing out of a sense of community and of belonging with each other for all kinds of reasons. And this kind of communication revolution that we've had has only accelerated that process. And so we're left kind of trying to alone mediate our understanding of the world through this flood of information that is available to us with no reality checks. And so part of it is to think about how to rebuild community fundamentally and basically. And that, I think, has to be through creating collective experiences. Right? It's only if we're together with people in the same place and talking to each other about what are we actually doing here together that you can begin to have a sense of, I can see where you're coming from now.
Did you say poetic?
It can be poetic, right? Certainly. But this is the kind of thing that I think that we actually have to go back to basics about creating opportunities for people to be in community and not have everything mediated through indirect communications.
Humility is an interesting word to use now, but because our culture is fueled by competition and getting stuff, and it's so deeply ingrained in. On the other hand, there are other streams that are around. I have to say one thing that I really interesting conversation lately between our JD and the Pope. I don't know if you caught this conversation. JD Vance is a recent Catholic convert, and he's Augustinian. He admires Augustine because Augustine has this something called the Ordo Amoris, the order of love. And so what is the order of love? It's concentric circles. And so you take care of your own first, your family. Then you take care of your relatives. Then you take care of the people in the city, in the country. And then those people out there, they should just go home to their families, if they have any. He justifies deportation with this model. The new Pope, Bob from Chicago, my hometown, Pope Bob said, JD, your model, the concentric circle model, is wrong. And then he said 4 words: we don't rank love. Those out there, the ones that have no legs, that are in the mud, that are monsters, the monsters, you love those people as much as anyone. And I thought, can I convert now? Who's saying this? Nobody's saying this. Our model is different. Our model is just get all the stuff you can for yourself, and it has nothing to do with this. And this is the engine of our country. It's deportation. It's our military policy. It's everything. It's what we can get. And so I don't think it's a poetic metaphor as much as an ethical one. What are we doing here? What do you want? What are you here for? What do you want? So nobody seems to be asking that question, although Bob does, So I just like to say a hey for Bob for a second.
I grew up in a time when there was just a certain amount of trust in institutions that you could rely on for information. So whether that was misguided or not, my question is it seems to me that what you're talking about is fairly abstract in terms of building community. How do we get from that place to building enough community where there is reliable enough structure that there is institution, or insert word that replaces institution, that something that we can rely on for information?
There is an old element of practical politics that comes into this. And that is that when we have these times of transition and change and crisis, we have to be experimental. And this may be the physicist in me coming out, but because we don't have a good theory that will tell us if you do this, then this, then this, then this is what will happen. It's not like turning on a light switch and the light will come on. We're going to have to make stuff up and be prepared to fail a lot, which is how science was built in the first place, that you try things. You throw your best understanding of the world at a problem, and then try something and see what happens, and then you try it again. And each time you hopefully are able to learn that, yeah, this works, this doesn't work, what do we do next? So we are, I believe, actually at a stage, for all the reasons that Laurie mentions, where you have to be radically experimental, right? You have to be willing to take risks, right? Throw everything that you have that you can at the crisis and try and do as best you can. Think creatively and take risks, but do it together. And out of this, I think, is that we may actually be able to create a new political process, because that's what I think will actually take. But, I'm interested in how Laurie thinks about this question of, taking risks and being creative to actually make new things happen.
I would like to start by saying, let's get rid of this, create more institutions. And I would just say maybe substitute something like networks, instead of building more institutions, building more networks. And I'm just thinking in particular of what's going on in terms of music and art and moving around the world now, because as borders close and get stricter, and it's really an issue. And these are international borders. So, but what I'm talking about is another type of network. For example, I never say I'm going to Germany, I'm going to Berlin. I don't say I'm going to France, I'm going to Paris. The urban network is the way that culture travels, the way that dance companies move, the way that musicians go places, the way that literature festivals happen. They are cities. They are cities that happen. And so if we can find other ways to make networks that do not depend on these international borders, which are really kind of fake anyway, because the real energy is going like that. And I'm just thinking of one time where I was in Frankfurt. I was in Frankfurt in October 2001, just shortly after that event here. And I had just done a show, and it was a solo show. After the show, it was like there was nobody to celebrate with. It was just solo show. So I said, nobody have a drink with or anything, no band. It was just, so I went back to the hotel. And I was like really feeling sorry for myself, and there was a really loud party going on in the lobby. And I was like, oh God, now I have to button it. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna, instead of feeling sorry for myself, I'm gonna put on my party clothes and go down and try to blend into the party. So there's all these like super stylish Frankfurters there. And but it had this other vibe to the party, like they had some purpose there. And I said, so what's this party about? And, and they said, oh, we're the firemen. I was like, yeah, and, the international signal for what the hell, And they said, it's a benefit for the New York firemen because they lost so many lives and so much equipment. And I thought, What city thinks of themselves as so international that they will help their brothers across the ocean? That is their responsibility. They feel this sense of community. So this is what I'm saying, is if we can reinforce these things that are already there, they're already in play, and those border things that come down, boom, no, you can't be it's US or Russia or whatever. Those are fake. Those are actually much more porous than anybody thinks. You can just slide right through. Music goes through them. Dance goes through them. They're not there. And so if we can find just another way to think about how to reach other people and not feel so isolated in our little country. Oh, I'm an American and now we're ruled by this crazy person. It's true and not true, So I think network would be a word I would use instead of institution, if we can start to think of how to make something like that happen.
So, it's really interesting when Laurie describes it that way, because what came to my mind is that, this year we've been marking the 80th anniversary of the atomic bombings. It's not just of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, of course. The very first people harmed by nuclear weapons were actually some of the scientists who were building them and got killed in the process of doing the experiments that led to the bomb. And then it was the people of New Mexico and the areas around that who were poisoned by the nuclear fallout from the first explosion in July 1945, because it was done in secret. They didn't tell anyone we're going to let off an atomic bomb, stay indoors, don't drink the water, don't eat the food. So the kids are outside, they're playing this, that, and this cloud of radioactivity. For the first time in the history of the planet, there's this giant cloud of absolutely toxic radioactivity flooding over these people in New Mexico. And so some work done recently has actually shown that that cloud of radioactivity covered almost the entire United States. And actually went as far as Canada. And you can find a lake in Canada that may actually have radioactivity back from then. But, it's also the anniversary of a much more hopeful thing that speaks to what Laurie was talking about. Because 10 years later, the last thing that Albert Einstein ever did in his life as a political action was to sign a statement together with the philosopher Bertrand Russell. It's called the Einstein-Russell Manifesto. Right? I like manifestos because they're a call to action of the kind that Laurie talks about. And in that, there is this luminous statement that in the world of nuclear weapons, you cannot think in terms of nationalism. You cannot think of my country and your country, because when the war comes, we're all going to die. So the sentence that Einstein and Russell came up with was, remember your humanity and forget the rest. And they called on scientists from around the world, regardless of nationalism, to build a new network of scientists to think exactly and do exactly the kind of thing that Laurie Anderson is doing. So this is easy for scientists in one sense, because science has always been an international activity. It's possible for musicians and for other people. The thing is, the challenge is for how to have more and more people who don't have that as the backdrop of their sense of who they are, feel that they can be part of these transnational communities. Yeah, absolutely. So I think thinking beyond, and this is where the climate movement has been really helpful to many people, because more and more people now realize that we actually are together as one human community on this very fragile planet that we haven't, the fossil fuel companies and governments have put in tremendous peril. But that sensibility is starting to dawn. But, absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more about the absolute imperative of thinking beyond nationalism.
My understanding from your story is that because you had special training as a physicist, that you saw an opportunity to be able to translate so much of the science to the public in hopes that it might have greater impact. And I would like to ask you, and for many people who've seen Oppenheimer, maybe this is nothing new, but I would like to include in this episode how nuclear weapons work.
He wants to turn this into a seminar, right? Somewhere he missed out in his education, and now he wants me to make up for it.
Oh, no lie, I'm a dropout.
It seems very unfair to everybody who came to hear Laurie Anderson to have me talk to them about how to... how do nuclear weapons work? Here's the physics and engineering of what happens. Okay, so when the United States was developing the first nuclear weapon, physicists had already worked out that if you could take a special kind of uranium and make enough of it, then you could trigger a nuclear chain reaction where the splitting of one nucleus of the uranium atom would actually create the same process of breaking down other nearby uranium atoms, which would break down, and then they would break down the ones next to them, and then leads to what we call a chain reaction. So 1 breaks 2, 2 breaks 4, 4 break 8, and it's a runaway nuclear chain reaction until a large portion of that uranium basically releases an enormous amount of energy in a very short time, what we call an explosion. And so they worked this out actually in 1940, 5 years before they built the first bomb. And then they just had to figure out how to engineer it. How do you make this special kind of uranium? How do you make enough of it to be able to build a bomb? So the hard part wasn't the physics of building the bomb, it was making the stuff, the nuclear stuff that makes the nuclear weapon. That was the real engineering and scientific challenge. And they did that. They figured out how to do it. And basically, one way to do it is you take 2 smaller pieces of uranium and just smash them into each other until it becomes a piece big enough to have a nuclear chain reaction. It goes bang, and you have a nuclear explosion. And that's so simple, because all you do is you put 1 piece of uranium in a gun barrel, put the other piece at the other end, and just fire 1 piece into the other, and eventually they hit each other and it goes bang. So this was the very first nuclear bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima, right? So they had a weapon that they knew worked, and it was very simple. But then they had to build a second one of a different kind, made out of a different kind of nuclear material, which is what you make in a nuclear reactor. It's called plutonium. And you take this material out of the nuclear reactor, and you can't put it into a gun barrel and fire it because it's much more unstable. So what you do is you take a piece of it and you compress it until it becomes dense enough that it has this nuclear reaction and it blows up and you get a bomb. And this was the bomb that was tested in New Mexico and then dropped on Nagasaki. So there are 2 basic, simple types of nuclear weapon. They have about the same explosive power. Each one destroyed a city, killed the better part of 100,000 people each. And then the United States, which was the only country with nuclear weapons at the time, decided it needed even bigger weapons and more different kinds of weapons. And so weapons kept evolving and evolving and evolving and getting bigger and more destructive. When the Soviet Union tested their first nuclear weapon in 1949, it was a copy of the bomb that was used in Nagasaki, almost exactly, because they had spies and they got a copy of the design. And that was when the Americans decided they needed to build a dramatically bigger weapon, a hydrogen bomb. And so they decided that they asked Oppenheimer and other scientists, can we build what they called a super bomb that would be vastly more powerful than the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki? So the scientists had a secret meeting, and they thought about it, and they said, yes, we could build you a super bomb that could be thousands of times more destructive than the bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But we should not do it. So they opened up the gap between what they could do and what they should do. And they actually told the American government that building a weapon like this would be evil. It's actually written in their report, which was classified, that it would be evil. This would be a weapon of absolute genocide. And the United States should commit never under any circumstances to build such a weapon. The US government classified their report and found other scientists to build it for them. So they built them, the super bombs, thermonuclear weapons, and they work by using an atomic bomb, like the bomb from Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as a trigger for a different kind of reaction, which is the same reaction that takes place in the sun that combines atoms of hydrogen of different kinds to actually create a vast release of energy. So 2 completely different kinds of physics between the atom bombs that destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki and thermonuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs. And hydrogen bombs can literally be thousands of times more powerful than simple atomic bombs of that first generation, as they were called. Now, weapon designs have evolved over time. Those first bombs were enormous. They weighed tons. Now, you could fit them inside space like this. And the reason is that the United States tested 1,000 nuclear weapons to try and get the design right. There have been 2,000 nuclear explosions in the history of the world, and the United States has done 1,000 of them to develop and improve their nuclear weapons. And that has destroyed the state of Nevada, in the Nevada test site, and destroyed islands in the Pacific Ocean. They exploded them in all kinds of places. The Russians tested, the Chinese tested, all 9 countries with nuclear weapons have. And so and you've got some of the pictures here of, some of the weapons that were there were, vast. Entire islands were completely obliterated off the face of the earth by these things. And the clouds of radioactivity that were released in these nuclear explosions spread through the atmosphere, going whichever way the wind was going. And you didn't always know that the wind was going to be blowing in one direction or the other when you did your nuclear test. Sometimes the wind changed direction. And so clouds of radioactivity covered the earth. And it turns out that all human beings, since the 1950s, all human beings are slightly radioactive because we all carry in our bodies the radioactive carbon that was produced in these nuclear explosions from testing all of these nuclear weapons. It's in our bones, it's in our blood, it's in our body cells. And it will take thousands of years for this carbon, radioactive carbon from these nuclear explosions to decay away. But yeah, we made ourselves and our entire planet radioactive through this process.
In your course, do you talk about the phrase atoms for peace and what it means and when it came into use? What does it mean?
So, it's a 12-week course, and I have to do it. It's 15 minutes.
We all want to sign up for this course,
Yeah. No, you're welcome. I mean, both of you. So anyway, the atoms for peace, where does it come from? So last point here. So the Cold War starts full on in 1949 when the Soviet Union tests and the Americans lose their nuclear monopoly. So those 4 years between 1945 and 1949, the Americans are the only country in the world with nuclear weapons. No one else has any. I mean, it didn't mean that the world became a good place just because we had them and no one else did. But we couldn't always get our way in that time either. So it doesn't actually do you that much good to be the only country in the world with nuclear weapons, because eventually other people got them. And by the early 1950s, the Cold War had become so bad and people were so afraid that the US government decided it had to do something about this. So they came up with a Cold War propaganda idea of atoms for peace. That people thought atoms equals atom bombs, which means the end of the world, because Einstein was telling people, yeah, nuclear weapons are going to get us all killed. So Eisenhower, people working for Eisenhower, came up with this idea that we'll figure out how to tell people that atoms can be for good things too. And the real story was that the United States was going to go around the world telling countries, if you support the United States in the Cold War against the Soviet Union, we will share our atomic technology with you for peaceful purposes, right? So American atoms are peaceful atoms, Soviet atoms are bad atoms. And actually, there is a very famous song that actually anticipated exactly this. It was written by Vern Paltrow in 1945. He was a musician and a journalist and a union organizer. And he interviewed a bunch of atomic scientists from the Manhattan Project in 1945. And he wrote this song called Old Man Atom, which was recorded by Pete Seeger. And this song talks about how if Einstein's worried, I'm worried. And it talks about, there'll be atoms in Washington and atoms in Moscow and atoms in Timbuktu, because everybody's going to get all of these things. But the point was that with the coming of Atoms for Peace, it was a simple propaganda tool to mobilize everybody to join the American side by promising that this super advanced, powerful technology that we had, we would share it with you. The Soviets wouldn't share it. Our atoms were good, their atoms were bad. Our atoms were peaceful, their atoms were not. And so It really was a way to try and convince people to be more supportive of the Atomic Energy Commission in the United States, which at that time was responsible for making nuclear weapons. And so by claiming that there were all these peaceful uses for atomic technology that would be good for people here and good for people around the world, you were trying to create this ambivalence about nuclear science and nuclear technology, that it's not all bad. And ours are better than theirs. But it's actually a really funny story, because in the process of, tragic story in one sense, in the process of trying to convince everybody that our atoms were peaceful, the Americans brought young scientists from around the world to the United States to train them in nuclear science and technology, because they didn't have it. And so they would come. They came from India, from Pakistan, from Israel, from South Africa, and other countries, from France, from England. And what did they do when they went home? They said, well, we need to have nuclear laboratories, and we need to have nuclear reactors, and we should have nuclear weapons, because look, that's what our teachers have. And so the key people that were trained by the United States under Atoms for Peace, actually, when you look at their autobiographies, you can trace how they went back and lobbied their governments to build nuclear weapons and ended up running those nuclear weapon programs. Right? And so that was actually the fallout of Atoms for Peace, that it actually trained a generation of young scientists to think like Americans, to be like Americans, to want to be Americans. And if Americans have nuclear weapons, then they should have nuclear weapons.
It's not very surprising in hindsight. I would like to include two questions from the audience here. When they have tested thermonuclear bombs underground, how have they not negatively impacted people? Like, why aren't we all dead or radiated? But I guess you've answered that. We are all radiated.
Yeah, and they weren't always tested underground, right? For a long time, they were tested above ground, because it's much easier to make measurements above ground rather than bury a bomb, hundreds of feet underground and then have to figure out, how do I know what actually just happened down there? So they used to test them above ground. And in some cases, they would actually drop the bomb out of an airplane and then detonate it in midair and make the measurements. So, yeah, but then eventually, because of protests, huge protests, especially when people started to realize these nuclear explosions were creating all this radioactivity that was getting into the food supply. And some people may remember there was actually an enormous concern in the United States and elsewhere when they realized that the radiation was getting onto grass. The cows were eating the grass. The milk that the cows were making was radioactive. We were feeding the milk to our babies. The babies were getting radioactive. Children were having radioactivity in their teeth. And mothers were sending baby teeth to these doctors to be analyzed. And the doctor said, yeah, it's got radioactivity in it. And so eventually, President Kennedy had to sign the treaty with the Soviet Union banning the testing of nuclear weapons above the ground for this reason, because people were so appalled by the contamination of the food supply and their bodies by this process. But yeah, so we are all radioactive.
The last question, and this is kind of a combination of two, but the essence is the nations that have the capability, which is pretty much all of them, it seems like, to build nuclear weapons, why, in your estimation, aren't they?
I think there's no one reason. I think there's lots and lots of reasons. But there's a fundamental reason that I do think that they all share. And that is that for most countries that don't have nuclear weapons, they're actually the countries of the global south. They became independent in many cases after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They became independent from the British Empire and the French Empire and other kinds of empires. And they wanted to be free to make their own choices as communities, as people, about what kind of future they wanted to have. And the superpower Cold War was going to basically get them killed. And it was not their war. Right? A war between the United States and Russia, what's it got to do with people who live in South America or in Africa? It's got nothing to do. It's not their fight. But if there's a nuclear war, they will die. And so many of the countries, and the majority of the countries in the world now actually are in that group. They basically want to be free to decide their future and not die as innocent bystanders in a war among great powers of the North. And so this has been a consistent effort by them for a long time. And so they've been leading the movement among countries to ban nuclear weapons. And it began in 1955 in Bandung, where these countries first got together and said, yeah, we should have a ban on nuclear weapons and on the testing of nuclear weapons. And it comes all the way up now to, in 2017, in New York, at the United Nations, 122 countries got together and agreed a treaty that bans nuclear weapons. There are 193 countries in the world. Out of those 193, 122 were in the room, and they agreed a treaty to ban nuclear weapons. The United States ambassador stood outside that room trying to stop them going in to make this agreement. And it was Nikki Haley. I was there. And everybody would just walk past her, right? Yes, indeed, yes. But so they've agreed at this treaty that bans nuclear weapons. And there are now currently 94 of those 122 have already signed it. And more of them are signing it as time passes. And what this treaty does is it bans nuclear weapons. It says you can't make them, you can't test them, you can't use them, and you can't even threaten to use them, right? It bans nuclear deterrence, what Matt asked about.
In your Plan A video, living in the South is a good place to be. Could you say more about why the world is chopped in half like that? I mean, I kind of see some of your thoughts about colonialism and this and that, but I really don't understand that line.
So the line in the video in Plan A is that was to look at a war between the United States and its NATO allies against Russia. And so we made this before the Ukraine war. But it used what was our best understanding of where are the nuclear weapons of the United States and its NATO allies, and where are the Russian nuclear weapons, and what would they actually attack with these weapons, and when in the war, etc. But when you look at the geography of North America and its European allies, they're all there, and so are the Russians. So that's why it's all up there. But we should never forget that what we now know about nuclear weapons, if there is a nuclear war like that this is the first few minutes. And these are the people that will die within the first few hours of that war.
90 million.
90 million, yeah. But the clouds of radioactivity that will be carried by the wind, that will take longer to reach other parts of the world, but it will travel around the world. But an even more devastating effect will be the fact that entire cities will burn when these weapons go off. If you look at pictures of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they're burnt down to the ground. When cities burn, people burn, trees burn, anything, because the temperature is incredibly hot. It's the temperature of the sun, so everything will burn. And all that smoke will go up into the atmosphere. And it rises so high that it actually goes above the clouds. So the rain can't wash that smoke out. So it sits there high above the clouds, blocking out the sunlight. And when the sunlight can't get through this cloud of smoke, the surface of the earth goes cold and it becomes dark.
So all the billions die.
Yeah. So we've known this since the 1980s, since Carl Sagan and others began to think about what they call nuclear winter, that a nuclear war will actually block out the sunlight. And now using climate change models that we have with modern computers, we can actually find out that this cloud will last for more than 10 years. It will be cold, agriculture will be destroyed, even natural plants will be destroyed because they won't get sunlight. Billions of people who have nothing to do with the war will starve to death because there is no food. Right? So it will be a global catastrophe beyond imagination. It will be the next great extinction of life because once the plants die, everything that needs plants to live will die. The oceans will freeze because it will be so cold. Right? I mean, that's our current understanding of nuclear war. And just this week, actually just yesterday, there was the first meeting at the United Nations of the new United Nations scientific panel to study the effects of nuclear war. The United Nations created this panel in December of last year. They said, look, we want everybody in the world to understand what science now tells us about just how catastrophic nuclear war can be, given what our understanding is now. So they're going to look at the science of nuclear war, the effects on the environment, the effects on economies, the effects on public health, on all of it, and say, this is our best understanding of just how terrible is the risk we run from having these weapons in the world.
And who are you making these reports for?
For all the countries and all the people in the world.
Who will be left at that time?
Once everybody knows what we know, the question is, what will they choose to do about it?
What's your guess?
I have hope. I'm a very optimistic person. Right? I mean, to be a scientist actually is to be hopeful, because you assume that you can actually understand the world. That's an enormously hopeful assumption, right? When you think about it, that it's understandable. It's not about just accept it for what it is on faith, but you can actually understand it. And so I actually believe that once people begin to understand what all of this actually is, as has happened with climate change, there is overwhelming support in the world now that we need to address climate change. We need to create a politics that will take our understanding and turn it into action. And that's the thing, not for scientists, but for everybody to figure out, well, what's my role in all of that? And that's a choice that people have to make, but they have to have the information beyond which then they can decide what they want to do. So it's about giving people the choice. Now you know, what do you want to do about it? That's on you.
On the topic of taking action, we have 2 bonus segments for tonight's event that I'm pleased to share with you. And this is just something that we developed in the last few days. As Zia has pointed out, 2025 marks the 80th anniversary of the first atomic detonation. And the Nobel Prize Committee commissioned the renowned Kronos Quartet, along with many other musicians, Laurie included, Ringo Starr, Willie Nelson, to record a pair of renditions of A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall by Bob Dylan, which, as many of you probably know, was written during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we get to premiere a version of that track tonight, right now, and the track's producer, Elia Einhorn, my dear friend, is here to introduce it and play it for you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Elia Einhorn. I'm so pleased to be here with you all. And can I just say before I talk about the song, you know, when humans feel like we're in danger, the blood leaves our extremities and goes to our core so that we can move into fight or flight mode. And my hands have been fucking freezing the whole conversation. I mean, since we started this video and everything, and I'm glad that there were some moments of hope, and I have a couple moments of hope to share as well. But I'm acknowledging that this has been a very heavy conversation, and I really appreciate you for facilitating it, man, and you two for being part of it. Yeah, I got a call. I'm a producer. I wear many hats. One of them is as a record producer. And the stuff that I produce is always tied to some sort of social justice movement. So I co-produced the record Tronza, which I'm really pleased that we have a full takeover in LA today of the Getty. And we're performing there tonight. I've done a lot of work. Laurie and I worked on a series with the iconic label Red Hot that was tied to climate justice. And so we worked on some with the Sun Ra Orchestra and many other musicians. Well, I got a call for this one from David Harrington of Kronos Quartet, who's led the group for its 52-year lifespan now. And David said, I got a call from the Nobel Prize Committee and the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. I'll admit I didn't recognize the latter name, but they're the folks who run the Doomsday Clock, which I think we all know about. And they're having a Nobel laureate conference against nuclear war on the 80th anniversary of the Trinity test in Chicago at U of C, University of Chicago. and they've asked us to do a version of Dylan's iconic song, and I want to do an all-star version, and would you produce it? And I said, yes, absolutely. And then he said, I want it to be an all-star version, like We Are the World. And I said, please never say that again. I'm allergic to that comparison, but I do get what you mean. And so what we did is we brought in a bunch of amazing musicians. My first call was to Allison Russell, the wonderful Grammy-winning Americana artist. And my first call with David, the second call we made, was to Laurie, who I think I know for me and David, and I think for probably a lot of us here, through her work and what she stands for, is a real moral compass in the arts. And we started putting together these versions. And to keep a long story short, we ended up featuring a lot of amazing musicians, and we wanted to feature musicians who, I loved, Zia, what you were saying about networks. We wanted to build a network of musicians who care about this stuff. And so we went to everybody from Willie Nelson, who kind of speaks in America across divides in a way that can be difficult for other musicians, like Pussy Riot, who we also went out to, Nadia from Pussy Riot. We went out to Asha Bosley, who is, one, maybe the most famous living Indian singer probably at this point. And I see somebody back there's like, maybe she's the most famous, maybe not. But during the recording of this, we genuinely wondered if there would be a nuclear issue. I mean, we had India and Pakistan starting a war at each other's borders. We had Russia and Ukraine. We had Israel bombing, not just what's going on in Gaza, but bombing Iran. And it was very scary. And I have a daughter who's 8 years old, and, if it doesn't happen in my lifetime, I need to make sure that this doesn't happen in her lifetime as well. So all that to say, we're going to play a song that we it's just come out. We premiered it live at the Nobel Assembly in Chicago. And Laurie, did you want to say anything about your part in this? I don't want to put you on the spot.
No, but I'm glad it was in Chicago. It's like, I have to say one thing, that I was born on the same month in the same town as the first moment of the atomic clock.
Oh boy.
Yeah, June 1947. That's when they started the clock, and it's a clock it's not a clock that goes like the way time usually works. It goes back and it swings forward and then it jerks back. It's now 90 seconds to midnight. It's the closest it's been in ever. And so anyway, that started in Chicago.
And of course, U of C was very much a part of the Trinity test. And okay, so I'll just give you a quick heads up of the order of readers on this. And this is the second version of the song. There's 3 tracks featuring many amazing artists that I've mentioned and some artists I haven't mentioned yet. We have a few here. Slow Spin, the wonderful Pakistani artist now based in here in New York, is on it. And Lolise, originally from Botswana and now living in Brooklyn or Queens, is on it, alongside Laurie and myself. But the instruments here are, I'm playing harmonium, and Kronos Quartet are playing. Shahzad Ismaili. I bought this beautiful candle, which was made in Palestine today at Figure 8 Studios. They're doing a fundraiser for families in Gaza, by the way, and it's going tomorrow as well if you're based in New York and you'd like to go support. Shahzad Ismaili Studio is doing that. Suhail Yusuf Khan is playing sarangi, and the readers are the poet Ocean Vuong is the first reader. Sampa the Great, the wonderful West African singer, is the second reader. Dai Wei from China is next. Sleaford Mods from the UK. Nadia Tolokonikova from Pussy Riot. Satomi Matsuzaki from Japan. You might know Satomi as the lead singer of Deerhoof. Iggy Pop is next. Tom Morello from Rage Against the Machine is after that. Stephen Merritt from the Magnetic Fields. Charlotte Gainsbourg from France. Willie Nelson After that, Laurie Anderson. And there's a couple of Laurie in there, and I hope you don't mind me saying it, I wanted to center, after you gave such a powerful reading, I wanted to center that as part of the ending, which people will hear. Masa Vadat, who is a political prisoner in Iran, and Ringo Starr. So maybe we can play that track, and there will be some happy moments after this track, I promise.
Oh, where have you been, my blue-eyed son? And where have you been, my darling young one? I've stumbled on the side of 12 misty mountains. I've walked and I've crawled on 6 crooked highways.
I've stepped in the middle of 7 sad forests. I've been out in the front of a dozen dead oceans. I've been 10,000 miles in the mouth of a graveyard.
And it's a hard.
And it's a hard.
It's a hard. It's a hard. It's a hard. It's a hard.
And it's a
Hard
hard
rains are gonna fall. But what did you see, my green-eyed son? And what did you see, my darling young one? I saw a newborn baby with wild wolves all around it. I saw a highway of diamonds with nobody on it. I saw a black branch with blood that kept dripping. I saw a room full of men with their hammers of bleeding.
With their hammers
I saw a white ladder all covered with water.
All covered with water. I saw 10,000 talkers whose tongues were overbroken. I saw guns and sharp swords in the hands of young children.
And it's a hard.
And it's a hard.
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 And it's a hard rain's
It's a
gonna
hard
fall.
rains are gonna fall. And what did you hear, my brown-eyed son? And what did you hear, my darling young one?
I heard the sound of a thunder
I
that
heard the
roared out
sound
a warning.
of a thunder
I heard the
that
sound
roared
of a
out
thunder
a
that roared out a
warning.
warning.
I heard the roar of a wave that could drown the whole world.
Drown the whole world. I heard 100 drummers who whose hands were ablazing. I heard 10,000 whispering, and nobody listened. I heard one person starve. I heard many people laughing. I heard the song of a poet who died in the gutter.
I heard the sound of a clown who cried in the alley.
It's a hard rain's gonna fall.
Oh, who did you meet, my blue-eyed son? Who did you meet, my darling young one? I met a young
child beside a dead pony. I met a white man who walked a black dog. I met a young woman, her body was burning.
Her body was burning.
I met a young girl.
I met a young girl.
She gave me a rainbow.
She gave me a rainbow.
One man who was wounded in love. I met another man who was wounded in hatred. And it's a hard,
who was wounded in hatred. And it's a hard rains are gonna fall.
What do you do now, my gray-eyed son? And what do you do now, my darling young one?
My gray-eyed son.
I'll go back out before the rain starts falling.
What'll you do now, my darling young one?
I'll walk to the depths of the deepest dark forest. Where the people are many.
Where the people are many and their hands are all empty. Where the pellets of poison are flooding their waters.
Where the pellets of poison are flooding their waters. Where the home in the valley meets the damp, dirty prison.
And the executioner's face is always well hidden.
And the executioner's face is always well hidden.
And where black is the color and none is the number.
And I'll tell it, and speak it, and think it, and breathe it.
And reflect from the mountain so all souls can see it.
Then I'll stand on the ocean until I start sinking.
But I'll know my song well before I start singing. And it's hard. It's a hard.
It's a hard.
And it's a hard.
It's a hard.
And it's a hard.
It's a hard rain.
It's a hard. It's a hard.
It's a hard.
It's a hard rain.
It's a hard rain.
It's a hard rain.
Hard rain's gonna fall.
It's a hard rains are gonna fall.
Where have you been, my blue-eyed son? And where have you been, my darling young one?
And what did you hear, my brown-eyed son.
And what do you see, my darling young one?
I met one man who was wounded in love. I met another man who was wounded in hatred.
I met a young child beside a dead pony.
I saw a black branch with blood that kept dripping.
What do you do now, my gray-eyed son? What do you do now?
When Laurie read that last line in the studio, we thought, that's it. That's how we end it. What do you do now? To every one of us listening to this track, what do you do now? And when we premiered this version at the Nobel Assembly, they had flown in Nobel laureates from around the world and folks from Capitol Hill, politicians from around the world, and psychologists, and they had, here's where I want to pivot to hope. Because being in that room, we were the only civilians, as it were, myself and Kronos Quartet, in that room while they were meeting. No pictures, no recordings. But being 45 years old and from Chicago, I'll give you an analogy of what it felt like to be in there. The Bulls sucked when I was a kid. And I don't know anything about sports anymore, but I did then. And the Bulls were terrible. And then in 90 or so, 91, something happened. We had Phil Jackson, this coach who had changed everything. We had Michael Jordan. We had Scottie Pippen. And that's when we went on and we won and we won and we won. And we brought all these rings back to Chicago, right? And being in that room with those people, I thought, I am watching that happen. I'm often jaded about the state of the world. But being in that room with those people who had done everything from identify the ways to communicate to narcissistic dictators, that parenthetically, you know what it is? You make them understand that if they start it, and you talked about this a little bit, they will get blown to fucking pieces themselves. So essentially, you have to tell Trump, those gold shoes, the Bible, all those things you sell, your little Florida club, it's all gone. If you start, it's all gone. But I really felt hope for the first time in a long time that I was in with people who literally have, and you can speak more to this than I can, but who have a track record of having changed policy around the world, implemented ideas that have saved probably millions of lives. And I saw them doing it again in action. And that was incredibly powerful. Enough out of me, but thank you for listening to that with us. Let's just be honest. We knew it was going to be a heavy conversation today, and that's why we're here, right? We want to be having difficult discussions. We want to be re-energized, hopefully, through those discussions, and we want to hear songs with the word petrochemical in them. But Laurie and I talked about it, and we thought we could end with some real community, with a network. And so, Laurie, I wonder if you would maybe...
I will just say two things before we start. I think about this thing every single day, so I'm just going to say it very quickly, because that's a devastating song that we just heard. And you think, what do you do now? And it's so easy to be crushed by these things, So I just want to say one thing is the words of my teacher, which I'm always quoting, Mingyur Rinpoche, who says, try to practice how to feel sad without being sad. And this is a really great distinction because there are very many sad things in the world. And if you pretend they're not there, you're an idiot. But do not, as he teaches, do not become sad yourself. Do not do that. And he emphasizes that the reason that we're here, the reason all of us are here is to have a really, really, really good time. That's the point. Anyway, because this evening is about energy, I want to just tell you a little bit about a book that we just put out called The Art of the Straight Line. And it was written by Lou Reed, my husband, and he never finished it, so we finished it for him. And when he taught me Tai Chi, it was an amazing experience, because the book is called The Art of the Straight Line. What does that mean when it's an art form of circles? Tai Chi is all about circles. And in fact, when your hands pass each other, you're actually making a kind of atom, really. And when you do this right, you start feeling this magnetic pull between your hands. You can't believe it. You take this thing and then you just move it out, you throw it away, and then you bring it back, and then you throw it away. So I'm going to show you a couple of these moves. I'm just going to get this. You probably know some of these moves. You might have seen them, people doing them in the park. There's one that just goes like this. This is a beautiful slice through the air, and this is decapitation, basically. This is a martial art. This is a killing form. Ritual killing, of course. So Lou's teacher made up something called the 21 form for him, which is something that you can do in small spaces. So I want you to join me in this. I'm just going to show you a couple of these moves. So just stand up, and one of the moves is going to be a punch, so you got to get a little bit of room. So we're going to, because the Chinese names for these things were really complicated, Lou made up English names for them. So a move like this is called carrying the pizza. So we're going to do that, carrying the pizza. Another one, which is very important, is this, which is calming the oceans. So this is how the whole thing begins. Now I'm going to just show you a couple of these. Avoid the punch. Just watch where your fist is going. Also, one more thing. When he taught me, I didn't know what I was doing, so I was just following along. So my thing was just fake it till you make it. So try that out. You just try a couple of these moves. So here's this. We'll just do a little bit of this one. And here we go, I think. That's the 21 form. You did a beautiful job. Thank you for coming to this.
Thank you so much, again, to the Poster House, Simons Foundation. Most importantly, Laurie Anderson, Zia Mian, and Elia Einhorn. To stay up to date with Laurie's upcoming appearances and exhibitions, please visit her website, laurieanderson.com. For more information on Zia's work, you can visit the website for Princeton's Program on Science and Global Security, sgs.princeton.edu. His website, sgs.princeton.edu/team/Zia-Mian, and that of the Physicist Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction, physicistcoalition.org/about-the-coalition. You can find out more about Elia's work radio hosting, producing, and DJing by following him on Instagram @Elia Einhorn. Additionally, Elia is producing an upcoming Transa event in Brooklyn on December 6th. You can buy tickets at festival.powerhousearts.org. Sing for Science is co-produced by Talkhouse and made possible in part by a grant from the Simons Foundation. Our music is by Panoram. Social media manager and video editor is Bailey Constas. Location recording was provided by Laboo Productions. And our digital producer is Keenan Cush. Special thanks to Angelina Lippert, Shaquille Bailey, Jillian Kwok, Colin Brady, Val Crosswhite, and everyone at Poster House for making today's episode possible. If you like Sing for Science, the best way you can support us is to give us a review, tell a friend about the show, and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. For more information, please visit singforscience.org and follow us on social media @SingForScience. Thanks for listening.